What is up, guys? You're tuning into this Okiru podcast. I'm your co-host, Jasper, and we thank you so much for spending this time with us. We hope you enjoy this episode. Make sure to follow us on our socials at okiru.apparel on Instagram, Okiru on Facebook, Okiru on YouTube, and also Okiru on major platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We hope you enjoy. Alright guys, we ready for this podcast? We in Assembly Yoga. What's going on, guys? We got... Wait, I thought we were starting. I was like testing it out.
But yeah, shout out Assembly.
Shout out to Assembly Yoga for allowing us to be in this space today. We have our mate Lim Enns, one of the most special people who... This is so awkward, no? Awkward intro. Because she can walk on water. She's like the female Jesus based on Lim. But yes, we have Azari. She is a PhD in... She has a PhD in neuroscience. She works in pharmaceutical and medical development. She's a movement enthusiast. Please explain on that later. Teaches yoga and is a co-founder of We Run West, a community run group. Welcome to the Okiru podcast. Thank you for having us here in this space, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Nice. So guys, we just finished an amazing yoga session led by Azari. What was your experiences with that session? Like you said at the beginning, you had this plan. And then all of a sudden, did you change that like in the moment, or did you initially come here and then it's like, oh wait, I'm gonna change this plan now?
I feel like I do that a lot. I had a plan last night in terms of the flow that I wanted to do. But I woke up this morning just not feeling it.
Oh.
So and it doesn't feel right to teach something that I don't resonate with if I've woken up the next day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was more of a last minute change of plan. And it was told not to wing classes. But yeah, I kind of like thinking on my feet and doing different things and reading the room and seeing how people are feeling on the day. Like if I come into the studio and everyone's lying down, I'm not going to do the class that I'd planned where people are doing handstands,
Right. Yes.
And so, yeah, so it was more of a last minute switch.
Cool. So was that like based on your past experiences, or do you have a plan already through your classes and then you just edit it and change it based on the room that you have?
Yeah. So I usually have a theme, like a neuroscience theme.
Okay.
And I tend to structure the class around that theme.
Okay. Yeah.
And for instance, today was about learning new things. And so it's just about throwing things in there that you may not have tried in a yoga class, like that balance we did in the figure 4 stretch. And so I always structure around that theme, but then the actual flow, even though I have a flow written down, I have a look at it and then I usually don't bring it with me because I like to be able to change it and adapt. And if I notice that people aren't resonating with the things that I'm teaching, then I switch it up in the middle of the class. So I have a plan, but it's loose. Yeah.
How did you guys feel in the class? Roldy, was it one of your first yoga classes?
Yes,
right?
it was one of my first yoga classes, and to be open and vulnerable right now, at the very beginning, I actually noticed myself getting very emotional. And I just felt like I wanted to cry at that time. And I was talking about this with Jasper when we were walking outside, and I was just saying, I think that vulnerability and that emotion came out because I noticed that a lot of this whole week I've been stressed out of my mind. And so when I came here, I felt that easing, like I needed this moment for myself. So, and yeah, the whole, like going through those motions, and I felt, I just needed it. And yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you for that amazing session, because I felt the opposite at the very end when we were at the point of just relaxing and just breathing. I was getting emotional. I wanted to cry.
You just have these two guys crying in the background.
I was like, I'm not gonna cry. No, the first ever session. Like, I'm just gonna let this happen and just like suck it up. But yeah, it was. I think for me, we were we were speaking about it before, and I was telling Joe like maybe I felt like I was hiding something or not accepting something that's happening, and just by relaxing and just being in that moment for that time, I was like, what is these feelings? What are these thoughts that are coming to my mind? Like trying to come to understanding with it. And I was just like, oh man, like this was an amazing experience. I want to come back and
Yes.
do more yoga, even though I can't do like most of those moves and struggling and shaking like the whole time. Coming from a lifting background, I felt so stiff. So, but it was a good experience. It was a really good experience.
It was.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because Liam and I were talking about this earlier when we were getting coffee about, I don't remember how it started, but we were talking about how I view yoga. Like I don't view yoga as the movement that we're doing, which is why a lot of the times my classes aren't serious in a way, and they're more playful and like not taking the asana so seriously, because it's such a small component of yoga that I don't think it deserves as much attention or as much seriousness. And this is like my opinion and what I see yoga as. And it's interesting that you mentioned, like you both mentioned the emotional part of things. I think in a yoga studio, when you're getting emotional, you don't have the option of getting up and leaving. Well, you do, but like it's a little bit rude if you just walk out the door. And so you're kind of forced to sit with your emotions, which is, there's something nice about that, rather than I'm feeling emotional, I'm going to turn on the TV or put on some music.
Yes.
So it's amazing. I love that you shared that.
Thank you. At the very beginning of the yoga session, you also mentioned like, don't fear trying something new. I think it's really good. I had to remind myself of that during the session. I'm like, man, this really sucks. Like my body's just shaking. Like everything kind of hurts. Like doing those movements. But I was reminded. I was like, like you're not gonna be good at this.
Yeah.
Like just sit in that pain, sit in that shitty feeling, and then just push through it. You know, and see what you can learn from it. It's like, okay, I need to do more stretches. I think my hips are too tight. So I was like, all right, you know, doing these things might help. Right, instead of just doing what I'm comfortable doing, even though it was painful at the beginning. Like I went from the suck period to it being comfortable. Now I'm trying something new and it sucks. So now I have to work towards being that comfortable, you know, phase. But you know, coming back to this question, what got you into yoga? Have you always been into yoga since you were younger?
No. So I got into it, I think it's been 12, 13 years, something now. So my sister started first, and she went to the extreme, like moved to India, taught there, did her training there, lived there for a couple of years, I think. I can't remember how many now. And I don't know how she found it. Like she just came across it and just took it and went with it, like just rolled with it. And my mum and I were hesitant to go because I was much more into like going to the gym, going for a run, like all the active lifestyle rather than like pulling back and softening. And she kept for so long, she'd be like, come to a class with me. I would never go to a class. And I went to one class with her and I was like, oh, this stuff is like, it's actually pretty fun. Like I love this. And so I got into it. My mom was still hesitant. And then the year my grandma passed away, so my mom's mom, that's when mom started going to yoga. So my sister literally dragged her to a yoga studio and mom would not want to go and she'd fall asleep and start snoring in the class. And my sister's like, I'm never taking her again. Like she fell asleep. But I mean, you're going through trauma, right? Like you're going through stuff and she was exhausted. And she kind of took on a similar thing. Like she went to India, did her training, and she has like something like 500 hours of training under her belt. And she's done yoga nidra. And then she resigned from her job at Telstra and went down like massage, became a Reiki master teacher. Like, you know, that completely went down that pathway. And so, yeah, that's a long answer to my entire family history of yoga, basically.
But when you first started practicing yoga, and I'm sure you were studying neuroscience already, right? What realizations did you come to meet through the practice from that neuroscience background? Because I know, and we could all feel it come through in your classes as well.
I had no connection then, like nothing. And I was doing yoga for purely the movement
Yeah.
aspect of things. And I was like, oh, cool, there's a place now where I can do a wheel because I do that as like just for fun. And now there's a space for me to do it.
Yeah.
So that connection didn't happen until my teacher training, which is only 3 years ago now, I think. And that was with Mel, who's the owner of Assembly, and Cecily. And their big thing, and you might have had the same experience, Liam, where they really push you to find you in your teaching.
Yeah.
And they're constantly like, every time I do a practice class, they'd be like, oh, that was great. Like, you know how to sequence well, you know how to instruct people well, but what's you? Like, what's the part that lights you up that's you're not showing in your practice? And that's when I came across the neuro part.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So it was
it's
only
recently.
recent. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was more to do with them, I think,
That's amazing.
pushing me to be like, what's the, what are you teaching for?
Mm.
And I always love the idea of people knowing about their brain. Like, I feel like the more you know about it, the less you fight against it. And you're working more with it, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
The devil you know, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what helps me is like, okay, it's how my brain is functioning. That's just how my brain is. And it's okay. Like, so I think it helps you deal with things a different way when you know how it functions.
Can you tell us about the physiological side? Because
Oh,
I
God.
know
Oh, I
that's.
thought it was going to get real scientific. I was like, oh shit, this is recorded.
No, because I see it. I've been to a lot of your classes already, and I find that the best way to, when I'm sharing the practice with my community and all that as well, is that physiological side and explaining to them to calm down that nervous system. But I'd love to hear it from you because I know your listeners can take a lot away from it as well.
Yeah, so I borrowed that from Andrew Huberman, who talks about it a lot. So his lab in Stanford, and I believe Jack Feldman, who's another researcher at UCLA, they do a lot of breathing work, and they've done a lot of work on physiological size. So they've measured this, and they've shown that it reduces your heart rate, but it also changed, I want to say the activity of the brain. So it kind of like brings you into this calming state. And largely it's because it slows down your heart rate. So it's going to make you a lot calmer. And so I think that's where I get most of my stuff from, is like Huberman Lab podcast. And they have this, like, you can sign up to their newsletter and they send you protocols as well, like breathing techniques and things to try, which for me is kind of cool as well, because a lot of them translate to breathing practices in yoga. And so you can kind of see where the link is as well. But now there's a scientific backing to that breath work. And I love that breath. Like, I use it during runs when I notice my heart rate's going up.
So that's
during
the two
workouts.
breaths in, one long exhale.
2 inhales or 1 exhale. And usually it's better to do it inhale through the nose and out through the mouth. So it's like 2 sips of air in, 1 long breath out. And I think it's such a great tool to have for people, like especially in the moments where you feel like your heart's racing and you're feeling anxious or just something doesn't feel right. It's just a quick way of like grounding down.
Yeah.
But if you do too many, you can get lightheaded. Just FYI. Just in case. Don't do it when you're driving.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's cool.
And Melissa tells me that it's when you're crying, you're sobbing. Is that?
Yeah, you do the gas naturally.
It's your body wanting to regulate you to begin with.
That's
and
so
it's just
interesting.
taking this and
Amplifying it, basically.
and amplifying it and doing it on your own accord to
with intention.
modulate and with intention to modulate your own body and system.
Who knew breathing would be so exciting?
It's so cool.
Wow, that's amazing. Is there any other tools that you could share for, like, in terms of breathing?
There's so many. So my eyes light up and I was like, oh, breathing techniques. But one of my other favorites is box breath. So you might have heard of it. It's like you're essentially breathing into a box, 4 count inhale, hold the breath for 4 counts, 4 count exhale, hold the breath at the bottom for 4 counts. And that's a really cool one because there's a lot of research on that as well. So the Navy SEALs use that as a stress relief technique or breathing technique. And it's good for the weeks that you feel like you know when you know stress is coming in the week? And so it's a great one to do every day for just a couple of minutes a day.
Yeah.
And I love that one. I notice a difference with how I am during the week if I use that breath. That's a big one. And then the one we did today, the 3-part breath in, and then the 1 breath out. So that's kind of like working with lung capacity and really breathing at your full capacity. So there's a lot of really cool ones.
Yeah. So you're a runner. When Gerald and I were doing those running challenges initially, because we don't run, it was like so shitty at the beginning. Like 5Ks was so hard.
Wait, what are these running challenges?
So there's one in, I think it was in July, where it was like run 100Ks in that month. Oh, in like 26 days or something. Yeah. So initially it was like 5 kilometers, and I got to a point where I was like running 10 to 12Ks like regularly. But
in that month.
In a month. So it was initially for like a week.
That's impressive.
5Ks was hard, and then I did 7Ks. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And you reflect on it, I was like, how did I get from 5 to 7Ks? And a lot of it was that breathing. So do you have any techniques for breathing when you're running?
So apart from the physiological side, which I use, and that kind of depends on like, if you're running with a watch and you can see your heart rate and you can see your heart rate fluctuating, and you can see the threshold that you're running with. But I feel like that's probably the only one that I use with running apart from nasal breathing. And now I'm just so hesitant to say nasal breathing because it's like this thing that's like taken off and everyone's like nasal breathing. But yeah, apart from those two things, like breathing in and out through the nose, doing physiological size to calm down, to bring down my heart rate. They're probably the only ones I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of things that you actually do. So you got the neuroscience, you got
I just realized that after I said it. Wait a second.
the running, walking on water.
I hope no one takes that seriously. Guys, I cannot walk on water.
She runs on water.
She runs on water. Sorry. So you have a lot of these passions. So what was the natural progression? Did you do running first, and how did you find these?
I blame my parents because I think they didn't want to parent, and they put us. Sorry, Mom and Dad. They put us into like a whole bunch of activities. So when my sister and I were growing up, they signed us up for like tennis, taekwondo, surf lifesaving, swimming. And I don't remember there ever being a day during the week where we were home sitting on the couch on an afternoon. Like Sundays, surf lifesaving the whole day.
Wow.
Saturday, tennis in the morning, and then school during the week, but then like taekwondo in the evening. Like there was just always something. And I think I was hooked onto movement from then, and it's just always been in my life. What I did changed as I grew older, which happens as you grow older. But running's always been in my life. So I did athletics when I was growing up and did like short distances. And then I probably really got into it when I moved to Seattle for work for a couple of years and joined this running group, which they were just running obsessed. And I just fell into that little trap, the running trap, and I just kept rolling with it. So, and the yoga like came in later. So I think, I love movement. And so all of these things are just coming in and out. And I'm surfing again now, like with a friend. So I feel like, I just love moving. And so if I don't move, I'm not in a good headspace.
Wow. So there's a lot more than to just the walking on water.
So she's not Jesus,
Now
she's
God.
So what is it about the running that is really appealing to you that kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, so I mean, with different parts of my life, it serves a different purpose. So when I was younger, I did it just to get the medals, and I wanted the age champion trophy, which I have now a collection of, which means nothing. But before it used to be about competition, and right up until undergrad, it was all competition. But now I see it more as a community thing and more as something that, like, it's the only thing that clears my head. And I think because I run to the point where I'm exhausted, but not in a bad way. like exhausted to the point where my brain just doesn't want to work anymore.
Mm.
And it's just, that sounds really weird, but I like getting to the point where my brain just shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
Like shuts down in a good way.
Is it
Not a
good
bad
one?
way. To the point where I'm like, I'm not thinking about like, oh, I didn't do that spreadsheet at work. Oh, I didn't do this at work.
True that.
Oh, I said this to someone. I wonder how it was received. You know, like,
So you get into the body to get out of the mind.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And it gets me to the state of like my brain just switches off and it's like the Zen state.
Yeah.
And I'm the happiest when I've run, like post run. It's
Mm.
just, I feel like I get a little high. So maybe I'm
Yeah.
addicted to endorphins. I don't know.
Yeah, you could drink, take
It's
drugs,
medical.
or you can just go
Yeah.
for a
I
run.
just run.
Right, exactly.
That's the runner's high that you.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Mm.
Okay.
And that's the point of exhaustion, like completely. I was gonna say brain dead.
But
Well, you're not
you,
thinking
like, you
too
would
much
know
of
it from gym sessions, right?
Yes,
Like, I go to
yes.
the gym and sometimes I'm out.
Mm.
Like, my
Mm.
body feels amazing and sore, but my head's like at this flat line
Mm.
Mm.
state
Yes, yes.
until I have coffee. And then there's like a little spike.
Yes.
So how do you fit all this in your week? Like you do running, you do yoga, you walk on water. You
we like to push the walk on water thing.
yeah, you do your job.
I
How
only
do you-
walk on water on Sundays.
only on Sundays. Only on Sundays.
Freeze up the
Where can we find you?
rest.
Like, at Willie Beach or
Yeah,
something?
Willie Beach, that's right, yeah.
I don't know how I do it. I think when you love doing the things that you're doing,
Mm.
like if everything in your life are things that you love,
Mm.
then it's easier to balance them, right? Like
Mm.
nothing feels like an effort right now
Mm.
because I love teaching yoga. I love running. I love my job most days. And so they're all things that I love doing.
Yeah.
And so I fit them
Mm.
in and they flow.
Mm.
And this was a perfect example of like I dropped something last year that wasn't working for me.
Yeah.
And that was kind of stopping that flow. And I know my mum always says this, that if you're doing the things that you don't love doing, you're occupying that space for the things that you do love doing.
Yes.
Mm.
And it's holding, like, even though you don't think about it, it could be just an hour in a week, but that's still taking up a bit of
Yeah.
space. And so I think it works because I just love doing.
How long did it take you to realize, hey, I need to drop this thing, and then you're still doing it, right? Until eventually dropping it, because we go through life wanting to pick up activities and hobbies and spreading ourselves thin,
Yeah.
but making that call to drop it
Mm.
and then relieving that burden off of you, because I guess deep down you know what you need to do, right? But
Mm.
to make that decision, how'd you go about that?
This is a plug for meditation.
Ah.
Please come to Assembly Yoga. No, but I think that's a big part of it. Like, I think my meditation is a big part of it. And I don't meditate every day, like it drops off.
Mm.
And when it does drop off and I'm upset, Mom's like, have you meditated today? I'm like, stop asking me that question. But I think it's a big part of it. Like, I think it's moments, you're not going to know what to drop if your mind is constantly at a state of busyness, right?
Mm.
Constantly at a state of chattering. You only notice things when things are quiet. And it's the same as like when emotions come up when you're quiet.
Mm.
And I feel like that's the moment, the quiet moments where I figure out what I want in my life and the things that I don't want. And I think the things that I drop comes down to my values. So now I'm at the point where if things don't align with my values, they don't serve a purpose in my life.
Mm.
And so it's easier for me to drop them and let that go.
Mm.
And I think like I'm thinking of Assembly Yoga in a sense at the moment because I never wanted to teach yoga and I had no intention of teaching yoga. I feel like that's what everyone says when they like, do teach training, but I genuinely did not want to teach. But I got offered a cover class and then another cover class and then a permanent class and then another permanent class. Like it just kind of rolled.
Yeah.
But I love this space because it meets all my values. And it's a space where I'm teaching, like I love teaching yoga to a diverse group of people and in a place where there is diversity because I'm someone of color. And so I want to be surrounded by people of color and have yoga be accessible to people like me, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so I feel like
Absolutely.
that kind of matches with like what I want to do in my life. And that's the same with the run group. It's in the West, and I think there's so much diversity in the West as well. So yeah, I think it's easier for me to drop things that don't align with the things that I want to see in the world.
But there are barriers to walking into a yoga studio as well, because I guess as a young male, it feels like it's out of reach. Like, how is it for you, like walking into a studio
I think it's
for the first time? Like, because I invited you to my class, right? And it's just this place. But how did you feel? And I know, Roddy, you didn't make it, but what were there barriers in coming into a yoga studio itself?
Yeah, just because it's a new space and I wasn't too familiar with it. Just entering it, you're just like, oh, what is it gonna be like? You know, how are they gonna treat me? I guess those little things play on your mind. And so when I was coming here for the first time, I guess I had those thoughts coming through. But once I kind of walked in and I felt the Zen, like it was very peaceful and calm. I was like, okay. So it was very easy. But like once I'm in here, it was very easy just to feel very comfortable in the space. But yeah, beforehand, it's just all the thoughts that come into mind, like, oh, a guy doing yoga, you know, are they gonna think I'm like, you know, just something weird or something like that? You know, just judgments.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Like, I think for me, if it was me a couple of years back, I'd be like, oh, what the fuck am I doing? Everyone's gonna look at me and judge me. I'm not doing the movements right. But if you get like where I'm at now, where it's at a point where I'm not caring too much about what people think, because everyone would have had to walk into a yoga studio for the first time too. So it's going with that mindset, like, hey, like, people aren't here to judge me. They're here to do this session. And, you know, it's my first time as well. So if I can't do something, I'll have to do more sessions and learn to get better at it.
Yes.
Right. And it's removing that own judgment of myself, like, oh, just because people can do this movement and I can't doesn't mean I'm worse off. Right. It's about like, how can I learn to be better, and just detaching myself from the opinions of others and just focusing on what I can do with my body and knowing what my limitations are, right? That's how I can grow from this. But you know, it's like what you're saying, there's kind of this peace here, you know, this, even though you can hear the sounds of the cars moving, you're just in this peaceful space. Like,
it's a safe place.
Like a safe place, right?
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. It's very comforting. But then you just go out in the world, it's like, oh, like we're back to reality. Like there was at one point where near the end, I was just so relaxed. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like dreaming. Like, is this even real life? I'm like, oh wait, it is. And then you hear the voice, like, oh, just like your thoughts, like just come back to the breath. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I forgot to breathe. I just let it flow and just come back to it. I was like, all right, now I'm back to reality, you know, just bring it back.
And how did it feel practicing in a space with other people? How did the environment work for you both?
I think it really helped. Just, for me, I don't like being the center of attention. So having those people around is just like, okay. And also because I can kind of see what other people are doing. Because a lot of the times I'm just like, wait, am I supposed to do this? And I open my eyes.
Was everyone lying down? And
my hips are still up.
I'm like doing the doggy.
That is the best reference ever.
Wait, this is the wrong class. Yeah, so it felt very, it was easy having those people around. And then just having the other people's energy around you as well, because you can feel their calm, and especially when you say like, you know, breathe in and breathe, and you can hear other people's breath. For some reason, for me, it's calming.
Yeah.
I was like, oh.
It reminds you to breathe.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So yeah, it was really nice. Yeah.
I liked how you there's that one part where you're like, oh, look beside you and just give them a smile. You know? It's just like, oh, everyone's a friendly person.
Yeah.
You know? It's just like, no one's like, serious, you know? It's like, they'll share that smile with you. So
that always astounds me. Like, I know I've walked into classes before, I haven't spoken to anybody, and I've just gone in, done my practice, left, and I'm like, what am I here for? I could have done that at home.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love that intro to like say hi to people and notice the people who you're sitting next to, because that's another human being. Like,
Yes.
There's another person next to you that you just did not acknowledge when you walked into the studio. And the whole point of coming to practice here is the community, right?
Yeah.
Like, otherwise you'd sit at home and do it Insta yoga. Like,
That's true.
Zoom yoga.
That's what surprises me a lot about yoga and practicing in the studio is when you end the class, everyone just scrambles to leave for some reason, to pack up their stuff, wash the mats, and out the door in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And you'll see me, I'll be like, just sitting
I'm
there.
the
just,
loiterer.
I'm the loiterer. I'll hang back. I'll take my sweet ass time just so I could like marinate in the goodness that I've cultivated and created in myself as well over the hour or stuff like that.
Yeah, I did see you. Lim's still like everyone's gone already, and he's just.
And for some reason, I love wind, the element of wind, right? When you're sitting there and it's just in the chaos of it all. Sitting at the end of a yoga class when everyone's running and scrambling, it's just like, it feels like sitting in the wind and just watching it all go by.
For some reason, my head went to like passing wind. I was like wind so much.
It must be that bagel.
There you guys, hold it in. Don't do it in the front of the mic, alright?
I wanted to bring it back to something that you said before about almost not wanting to do teaching yoga. What was the reason, and how did you overcome that feeling of not wanting to do it?
So I actually wrote an article on this for a friend of mine, Alexis, who is a meditation teacher. I feel like I just gave her a little plug there.
Plug away.
She's amazing. But I read an article for her blog about, and that was like, we're talking about vulnerability earlier. That article was a big vulnerability moment for me. I sent it to her and she posted it, and the next day I was like, shit, people are going to read this and they will know. But I say I don't love teaching yoga, but not in a bad way. I don't think anything's good or bad, but I don't wake up feeling excited about teaching a class, like the same type of joy that I'd get maybe if I get up to go running or go to do something cool at my job. I don't have that same excitement on my teaching days. And it took me a while to figure out why I was feeling that. And I realized what I love about teaching has nothing to do with the teaching itself. Like, I'm the same. I don't like being the center of attention. And so that's why I get everybody to close their eyes down in the beginning when I'm talking. I'm like, please don't stare at me. Which sucks, like going through my PhD, because I do conferences and there'd be so many eyes on me.
Wow.
And I just don't like people staring at me, like that many people just looking at me. So anyway, I don't love the actual act of teaching, but everything that I get out of teaching is just like fills my cup. And so I love being around people. Like, I love hanging out with people and just meeting a new person every day, like learning something new about somebody random. And I think it makes you appreciate things a lot more, like knowing what other people are going through. And there's this moment of connection in teaching that I don't get anywhere else. Like, if I didn't teach anymore, I think there'd be a little hole in my life in terms of community and connection. And that's my main reason for teaching. So I love the beginning of a class and the end of a class. Like when I'm chatting to people and people are walking out, whether they feel great or they felt crap at the end of the practice. Like, I think that has not so much to do with my teaching and me, but what they're going through in their life too. So I don't love the actual act of teaching, but I love everything else about it.
That's like me with running. When we were doing that 100-kilometer thing, I realized I hate running. It sucks. But then at the end, you're like, this feels amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I love the outcome of running. I hate the process of
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
It freaking sucks, man. I remember that one time, the first time I did 7K straight, I felt so shitty after work. My knees were all fucked up, and I was like, man, I gotta do this 7Ks. And I just did it, and just having that mindset, like, all right, just keep going, like, keep pushing one step at a time. I was like, you know what, it's not too bad. And you get to the end, and you're like sprinting. I'm like, holy shit, like, this was amazing. Like, I just feel like if I didn't go on this run, I would have been worse off, right? You spoke about you don't want to be the center of attention, but you speak in conferences. How do you overcome that feeling before stepping on stage?
I think you just do it.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really have a choice during my PhD or when I did a postdoc. If you want to get further in your career, you need to go to conferences and present your work, right? Like, that's the whole point of sitting in a dark lab for hours doing research and then not telling anybody about it, just kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
So you get forced to do it. And not that I don't love it. Like, I love talking in front of people and I get a little like high from it. And I also love the fear associated with it. I don't know if that's part of a psychological problem, but I do love things that induce that little bit of fear in me, like things that make my heart race of like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it, but I do it. And that's how I see public speaking. Like, I don't enjoy the moment, but just doing it and the end of it is the parts that I love. I just realized I love the beginning and ending of all things. Nothing in the middle. I think that's what it is.
Awesome.
It's interesting because we're taking our seats here today, and then I let you go first just to see what kind of move you'd take, and it's just like to the side.
Yeah, because that middle is like right in front of the camera.
Yeah, I was thinking of like, oh, where should I sit? I was like looking at the side, and Jasper sitting there. I was like, okay.
I want to see at the end, man.
Yeah.
You're on all the podcasts. I'm on the end. So.
Yeah.
You gotta stick to the consistency, man.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
didn't realize it was a psychological test. Liam's running his own psychological experiment.
Oh, man.
Speaking of challenges, actually, Lim, you're doing a swimming challenge
you
at the
finished
moment,
it, yeah?
right?
Yeah, I
finished?
just completed it. So, like you guys in doing running, I'm not much of a swimmer, right? But I'll call myself a swimmer now because it's doing the act of swimming. So I'm a swimmer. And Ansari, we've had this discussion when I said...
That's why I gave you the look and I was like, are you going to call yourself a swimmer?
Yeah, exactly. When learning to run, you're like, oh, I don't run. I'm not a runner. But when you're doing the act, you are a runner, right? But my swimming challenge, I'm proud to say that I raised $2,500 for the Starlight Foundation.
Awesome.
That's good.
And that's the power. What I've learned is the power of putting yourself out there, of asking, of giving something new a chance and a shot, of challenging yourself. Because I was only planning to swim 5Ks and it turned out, I could probably do more. So I'm like, all right, the default max was 14K. So I'm like, I'll give that a crack. Right. And it was about taking my friends and people on the journey with me and highlighting, hey, I'm at the beach every day swimming. And I think people bought into that, but I'm very happy to see that I've brought my community, brought my friends and family together to do some good for the world in a time where you look around and there's a lot of things that suck.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think just saying that what I just noticed and realized is because there's a purpose behind that running or swimming, you were able to do the act. If there was no purpose behind it, it'd be so much harder.
Yeah.
Right? And there's also one thing you also said that I just recently learned is we're so afraid of doing is asking. Like, just by asking, you never know what the answer will be. We're always making assumptions. And I just read a book recently called Influence is Your Superpower. And it was talking about how people fear asking. But when there was a purpose behind what they were asking, people were more inclined to help them out. So there was the person who wrote it, she's like I forgot what she teaches, but she's like a lecturer. And she got her students to do a project. Like, they started off with a paperclip, and they had to try trade that paperclip in to see what they can get out of it. Cool. And once a pair of students were able to change that paperclip for a car somehow, but they were able to do that because there was a purpose behind what they wanted it for. So the purpose was they wanted to give that car away to someone who was a refugee, and the person who was at the car dealership was like, "Yes, I want to help you," but they wouldn't have gotten that answer if they didn't ask for it. But because there was that purpose behind it, people want to be part of that, want to be a part of something greater than themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess coming to that, like, what do you guys believe is your purpose?
Oh gosh, getting to the deep stuff now.
Yeah.
Nitty gritty.
We're getting down deep, down deep
I just
into
looked
the
at Liam.
abyss.
I was like, what is yours?
No, I've had a lot of time to think about this purely through COVID, through writing and journaling practices, right? I feel there are three things that I'm working towards, and I want to work in the nexus of these three things. And they are working in tech and my background in IT and using the internet and digital media to scale impact. The second is yoga and meditation. It's the practice that has done so much for me to open me up, to allow me to soften in the world that makes you so hard and masculine and really achievement based, right? And the third is the work that I want to do more into the community as well, because like yourself, Anzari, I really value and cherish the spectrum of multiculturalism in Australia, right? We all have such rich stories of our families getting here and struggling, and the trauma that we all hold collectively by our parents taking a risk to search for a new life or better circumstances, right? So if I can somehow join all three of them together, which I'm taking baby steps towards, then that's where, for me, work becomes play. Where like Anzari, it's like effortless and you flow, right? It's not like, oh, you wrap up at like 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. after a long day at work. It's you take a break and you could probably continue because it's like play for you. Yeah.
Sounds like building an empire.
Secretly building it.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes. Look at that smile, man. That smile says
I
it
feel like
all.
that's when you need the evil laugh.
What about you, Anzari?
Mine's, I feel like, comes down to one main thing. And I think it's the reason why I did my PhD. It's the reason why I'm in research, reason why I teach yoga, why I started the run group, that kind of stuff. And I've always had this want to help people and I know I'm not going to be able to help everybody. That's impossible. But just to make some sort of a difference in people's lives, whether it's through medical research and helping advance medical treatments, whether it's yoga. And I just did my Reiki 2 training with my mum, so I have that on my background now too. And I just hope that, I just want to be part of things and projects that are going to help people with their lives. I don't want to go through my life just living my life and it's fun to go out and live my life and party and do all of those things, but it doesn't fill my cup. And I feel like the things that bring me joy are the things that help other people and change people's lives for the better.
When did you know you wanted to do that?
I think I've known that from very early on. So I wanted to go to med school since I was 10.
Oh, wow.
But that's also I grew up in an Indian family. You're either a lawyer or a doctor. So let's not get too carried away with that as in thinking I'm the smart 10-year-old. But I remember mom used to tell us this story of my sister and I. My sister's the same. When we first moved to Australia, I think it was, we saw a homeless person on the street. But I think he didn't have a limb or something. And mom said we both started crying, my sister and I started crying. And we were upset the whole day of this guy not having a house and not having a limb. And so I think that was always there early on. And we grew up, my sister and I grew up in Fiji, where there's still a lot of suffering. We live down the road from an orphanage and there's a lot of kids there that don't have homes. And so whenever we had parties and things, Dad would always give food, take food over to the orphanage or invite people over. And so I think I've always had that in my family. I remember when I got my first job, Mom's don't forget to donate part of your first paycheck. As a, not even that you need a reason to do it, and she didn't even explain it. It was just, we always donate our first paycheck from the first job. And so, yeah, so I think I kind of just grew up with the you live by helping others situation.
That's
Was
beautiful.
was your mom a big part of that?
Yeah, they've always been. They're big on believing that the more you give, the more you get in return, like the more abundance you have. And I think they're the perfect example of that as well. Like they're always giving, and not to the point of like wanting just to get something in return, or they just genuinely just love it. Like if you come to my house, you don't even need to think about whether the lunch is going to be there or the dinner. Like you will get fed to the point where you can't walk out of the house. Like, and it's more about them showing love. Like I realized that that's their version of showing love is like, how can I help you? And it goes overboard sometimes. Like I showed Dad this side table that I wanted, not saying make it for me. Like this is the one that I'm looking at, and he made it for me, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So now we kind of, I hope he doesn't listen to this, but now we don't tell him when we want certain things because he will do it. Like, and so whenever Mum tells me something, she's like, I want a sideboard for the house. Like, don't tell your dad. So it goes to an extreme. But I think that's where I get it from.
I wonder if that's part of an Asian upbringing, because I see that in my family as well.
I think it's very much an ethnicity thing.
Yeah, because acts of service as the way to show love, right? Because coming from Asian families, I'm not sure if you guys experience this, but it's not spoken and articulated, but
you show it.
You show it, and that's the way. It's being in service. It's feeding you. It's coming home and then packing you all this food to take away and all that stuff as well. Do you see?
Yes.
The same?
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, my mum's way of showing her love is like, you know, cooking for us, and you know, my dad's way of showing love is like providing for us. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, I resonate with that.
I'm curious to know if you find that affects your relationships. Like if you have been in a relationship with somebody of not an ethnic background, and how that like affects the relationship.
In what way do you think?
Like the ways that you show love. So for an example, I just thinking of this in terms of, so my last relationship was with an American. And he never cooked for me. And I was talking to my counselor about this, along with the many issues. But anyway, one of them was, I was like, he never cooks. And for 7 years, I just wanted somebody to cook for me and to come home and there's a meal there, or like wake up in the morning. I don't care if you pour cereal into a bowl, like just the act of doing it. And she said, you know, it sounds like you're nagging. Like it just sounds like you're like, oh, clean the house, oh, cook. And she's like, what does it actually mean to you if somebody cooks for you? And I realized it was love. Like, and so, but I realized that not everybody shows it that way. And not everybody, like I grew up with cooking for you is love. And I remember Mum going out shopping, like not even anything important. She'd go out shopping and come home and Dad cooks lunch. And he's like, I thought you might be hungry when you came home from shopping. And I was like, she just shopped. She didn't do anything. So it's just interesting.
Do you think it's like, because we're so exposed to that at such a young age, and then you're in a relationship for X amount of time, you have the expectation of those things to happen.
Yeah.
And that's what the 5 love languages are for, right? To understand each other's love language.
Yeah.
Like for me and my partner, we come to understand that you have to communicate what you want. Like if we asked initially, early on, it was like, how do I fill your tank? What things can I do to, you know, to make you feel loved, to help you feel loved? And it's just like them explaining it and then you explaining how you show love as well. And if that doesn't fill their tank, it's like, oh, okay, so maybe I have to do something else. Like that communication is such a strong part of it. But also having the expectation from what we've seen, it can affect our relationships, I guess, in that way as well.
I love that. I love the idea of having that conversation, which seems so simple.
It is.
But I imagine very few people have that conversation, right?
Yeah. It's like what you were talking about having what our parents show us is that unconditional love, right? Whereas some of us see as transactional love. Like you got to do something, and then
Yeah.
I have to do something for you. Like I was telling my
Mm.
partner this, like I do the things I do for you out of love. Like you don't have to show that to me. You don't have to be like, oh, because you did this, I have to do this now. It's like, no, I'm doing this because this is how I show love.
Mhm.
And I know, because I know you love me, you're going to do something out of love as well. It's having that trust,
Mm.
developing that trust. And it's so hard to develop that maturity in love, to be like, I trust you enough that whatever I do will somehow come back to me. But it's having that belief it will, right?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. Damn.
I love that. I know. I was like, I don't even know where to go from that, because I'm just like still thinking in that moment.
Mm.
Yeah, well, let's go back to, we were talking about vulnerability before. That's not something that's really easy to really express in our lives. But I find that we express vulnerability after certain struggles and suffering. If you guys are comfortable sharing, like, how were you guys able to understand, like, wow, being vulnerable makes me so open, like it relieves me.
I love that we all look at Liam.
Because we can see him thinking.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking that nothing.
It's like this bulb that goes off.
That's just
That's a microwave.
Well, sharing vulnerability is always hard,
Mm.
right? That's where you asked that question and we all froze. Well, I froze.
Mm.
Did you
Mm.
freeze answering? Did you like,
Yeah.
don't look at me, don't look at me, right?
That's why I was
you
like,
all
look
looked at
at
me.
Liam.
And so it's really hard. And when you go out to parties or you go meet people and you have that surface level connection, like sometimes you want to dig more, but sometimes you don't want to go into it, because also there is a time and place for things.
Mm.
But when you dig and you ask further questions, and you sometimes you protect yourself by not digging and not following and asking questions, even though you're curious about people.
Mm.
And maybe by being selfish and not asking the question, or thinking how they might react if you ask questions, is not being vulnerable to yourself to start opening conversations up, potentially.
Mm.
But it's, how do we create environments in our relationships with others to allow more vulnerability to take place, if that's what we want as well. Sometimes you have friends for certain purposes, where you go out and all you do is run, potentially, I don't know. Or you go out and you party or
Why'd you look at me for the running and over there for the party? You got a run party.
What? There's a party over here.
party in the back. That's all.
Party in the back. That's what it is.
Yeah, look, that's why vulnerability is so hard to articulate. But Ansri, you were talking earlier about Brené Brown. I've not read any of her work, but it's been mentioned so many times. Like, I see she is used as a resource for a lot of people. Can you share anything about her work at all?
I love her work. I feel like a lot of people do, because it's so relatable to the things that we're going through in life. And I see vulnerability two different ways. So being vulnerable, I think, comes down to the reason you're being vulnerable, right? So there's a version where you share something with somebody to speed up connection. So if I'm like, oh, Lim, I haven't told anybody this before, but this happened to me as a trauma when I was growing up, that's speeding up connection. That's not being vulnerable,
True.
in my opinion, and in psychology's. And then I think there's the other side where you're genuinely sharing because I don't know, there's a conversation flowing and you feel the urge to share something that you've gone through because you want to connect with the person that you're speaking to in a way that they get to better understand you. And we all have chapters, right? Like, I'm meeting you all at a chapter in your life, but I have no idea about the past chapters of what made you who you are. And I love that aspect of vulnerability, like sharing stories to better understand, not that those past experiences make you who you are, per se, but they did make you who you are today and
Yeah.
why you respond to,
Absolutely.
like maybe there's a reason you don't like buses, you know, and there's like something associated with the trauma of buses. And so, yeah, I think for me, it comes down to why you're being vulnerable. Are you trying to speed up a connection with somebody and make more friends?
Yeah.
Or are you being vulnerable because you want to share information and you want people to be vulnerable with theirs?
Yeah.
So I think there's a place for vulnerability.
But with vulnerability, and it's like the universe is a mirror of what you present to the world, right? So, Ansri, you're telling me, tell us about the love notes that you received this morning.
Well, this is like a random conversation off track. Well, so I'm a person, I was saying to Liam, that now these days, and it took a bit of work to get there, but these days I yell out, I love you to people. And I don't care if you don't say it back.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you don't love me back. Like, that is not my business at all.
Mm.
But I want you to know that I love you. And I was saying that there's so much of this, like, I love you holds so much power for some reason. Like, people are hesitant to say it. And I've been in situations where I've said it to a friend where I've said I love you and never got anything back, like, which is fine. It's not the reason why I said it, but it makes you notice when people are hesitant to say it. And I am one of those people that I'm like, if I've met you and I've known you for 2 weeks, if I love you, I know I love you. And so I'm going to say I love you in 2 weeks. And I don't see anything wrong with that, like, or any issues with that. And I love, like, we were hanging out at Migrant getting coffee, and a friend of mine, she sent me a message saying, good morning, just wanted to say I love you. And I love those messages. Like, and I realize I do that to people. I send people random messages like, P.S. I love you.
Yeah.
And it just, I think that's a form of vulnerability
Absolutely. Absolutely.
without knowing, like, what people will say in return. Text messages are easy because you're like, oh shit, it's sent, it's gone. But saying it to people is like, is huge. And Mel does that too. So Mel, who owns Assembly, she'll yell out, like, we'll go at the end of the run group, we'll be walking off and she'll be going to a car. I'm going in the other direction. And I'll be like, I love you. And she's like, I love you. So it's just, yeah. I love it when people are able to do that without that fear.
Yeah.
I guess it's something that you don't usually hear as well. It's like, especially because I'm probably talking about myself.
We love it.
I love you.
I just met you, but I love you too.
But yeah, I guess going back to like my parents and stuff like that, like it's not a word that's said often. So I was wondering if the closer you are to someone, because I'm thinking, because I can say that more easily to, like, say for instance Jasper or you guys here, compared to when I say it to my parents. Like, it's something that's holds me back from saying it, because I don't know, I guess that thing that you were talking about is whether you're going to receive it back, and if you don't receive it back, it hurts even more because it's your parents. So I wonder if there's
I think it's a cultural thing too,
It's a
right?
cultural thing,
Because
yeah.
I remember when I was going to bed, like, mom would say I love you, and my dad would come and say I love you, and every time they would leave for work, they'd come and say bye to us and say I love you. And my dad's not a big I love you person, but he will say it, and that's just how we grew up. And they kind of drilled into us that you do not go to bed angry, you do not go to bed upset at somebody, you will make up, say I love you, and then go to bed. So I think a big part of it is cultural and how you grow up.
Well, I actually noticed with my parents though, just before when we were kids, they never said I love you, but now they're saying it more often. Like, because I think, like,
I love
I
that.
don't know where it came from. It just
Yeah,
started,
I don't know.
and they just started like in text messages and things like that. Like, I hope you're okay, love you. It's like, it's the first time. It's a bit of a shock, but now they do it like more often, and I'm just like, oh, it feels nice, you know.
Could it
Like,
be?
I wonder where they're getting that from, or where they're learning
Mm.
to be just more open.
Could it be
with that.
because they're getting older and it's like,
Mm.
you know, their time, like time is, our time on earth isn't, well, it's long, but it's not, it's ephemeral, right? It's, we don't know. But as we get older, so are they. And then that kind of declines. So maybe it's like, maybe I didn't say enough when they were
When I was
younger.
younger,
So
yeah.
now it's like the time.
Mm,
Right?
I think the world is changing too. Like, I
Yeah,
think people are more open
absolutely.
about their struggles.
Mm.
And we see a lot more things now, right? Like that one little sentence can change someone's day.
Mm.
And just me saying I love you to somebody, that might change their whole day at a time maybe where they're feeling like nobody loves them or they don't have anybody. And all of a sudden you get this message saying I love you. And so I think people are recognizing that people are struggling.
Mm.
Yeah, the world is changing. There is a shift to becoming more heartfelt as well, I feel, and more conscious of mental health and not holding burdens onto ourselves and protecting others from our burdens. But yeah, that's sharing, because when you share, others might learn from you, or they'll come out of their burdens, and then you can kind of connect with the vulnerability in itself, and that's how you develop deep connections and develop relationships of absolute substance rather than running or partying.
Come on, hey,
Running has so much substance.
You go harder than me, man. But yeah. Anyway, going back to that, Anzara was talking about how vulnerability can be that quick connection to people, right? My partner and I were having this conversation. She's brought up like one thing she realized is a lot of her friends that were like best friends, they became friends because of trauma, and it was just like I look back, I was like, damn, like some of my friends that I was close with was because of trauma, and I was just saying like how it could be so toxic because the relationship you have could just be just talking about trauma, and then once a new conversation comes up, is like, how do you navigate that conversation, because all you ever known was talking about all the negative stuff. And now I look at it in this new mindset where it's not that I don't like people talking about their traumas, it's just protecting myself and being like, I understand you're going through that stuff, but if that's all you talk about, like, I don't want to be in that place too, right? Like a birds of a feather flock together. The longer you're in those friendships, it'll rub off on you and can damage you. So it's just reflecting on how you be vulnerable, when and where to share it, and if it's the right person you're sharing with, and if it's the right purpose behind it, you know. But yeah, that was just a thought I had based on that. Why are you shaking your head, Nim?
I can see.
No, that's a hard question. There's so much there. But you're talking about trauma, and look, I got to learn a little bit about your family history, Anzari, just then as well. And I can't explain it. Do you want to, if you do want to go into it, it's your Indian heritage, moving to Fiji, and I guess that part of history there, because my family are Vietnamese refugees, right? So, and I've explained this on this podcast as well, that there are two generations of refugees. So escaping communism from the north of Vietnam to the south, that's leaving everything behind and escaping, right? And a second time with the war breaking out, my parents fleeing on boats to go to an unknown destination, just to go away, because there's no present left, there's no future there in the country. And we see that a lot in Australia in terms of refugees trying to come here for a better life, from a lot of communities from Africa escaping, and like we see wars in Syria, people that have been oppressed from Afghanistan and Iran, and now we're seeing that in Ukraine as well. Look, I'm not sure where I'm going with this exactly, but the generational trauma that sits within us and all of us at some point in time, because we've been affected by world wars, like everywhere. Like Australia in itself have participated in wars, and you might have Australian families with grandparents who had fought in world wars as well, and bringing that kind of trauma back, and being so closed off in talking about feelings, because when you do open that trauma, it's shell shock, it's PTSD and all that as well. But I think we all feel it, and we all recognize that there is an element of healing in a way, and our society is becoming more accepting of it, because when you accept it, then you can move on, and then you can tell everybody that you love them.
Yell it out. I see it. I don't. So there's two different things. So with the friendship thing, I've had friends that I've met during really bad periods of my life, but they're still in my life. And it's amazing to have them in my life. But I think the difference is that people either grow with you or they grow away from you. And I think, I love my own sentence. Write that one down.
Write it down before you
The other
forget
one
it.
I said to someone that I was hungry but not for food. And I was like, I love that. It's my own sentence. Anyway, sorry. Being really humble right here. So I think it depends on the people, like the type of people. I remember, one of my best friends in Seattle, she was the first person I called when I found out my partner was cheating on me. And there's a horrible, like the cheating is not your usual cheating story, but anyway, let's not go there. And I called her, it was 10 p.m. her time, and I was like, I need to talk to somebody. And I didn't know who to call. I couldn't talk to my parents because it's just too raw of a conversation to have with my parents. And we were both living at my parents' at the time because we'd moved from Seattle. So anyway, I called my friend and I was like, oh my God, so I found out this happened, like he's cheating on me. And she just started laughing, like hysterically laughing. And I started laughing. And there's not many people that can get away with that, right? Like you tell your best friend your partner of 7 years you're married is cheating on you and they laugh. I mean, she was laughing at how he cheated, but that's besides the point. The point is that she laughed and it just like it almost like felt like somebody just lifted this weight off my chest. And I was crying and laughing and she was crying and laughing, and she's one of my closest friends. So we snap every day, Snapchat.
Yes.
And we've been snapping for 600 and something days.
Nice streak.
Yeah, because she lives in Seattle and we can never figure out a way to talk. Like the time zone, it just messes things up. And I think that's a perfect example of people who either grow with you and they know the things that they've gone through, and there's this power in it. Like now when I talk to her about relationships and something that happened, she'd say, oh yeah, that makes sense because of what you went through. So I think there's a power in people that you meet during traumatic experiences in your life if they grow with you and if they're not stagnant in that old energy that you were used to be at. So I think you either level up or you drop them down. Like they're either gone. And friendships work in a tier system, right? Like this is psychology, that you have people at the base who are your extended friends, and then the tip gets smaller, you have your closest friends at the top. And I think sometimes the people that are at the top are the ones that have grown with you and have survived things with you. I know, I love this deep thing. It's a coffee, like kicking in. And then with the generational thing, like that's something that I'm working with my counselor, because I think you can break generational trauma. Like I think you can break patterns.
Sure.
So in Indian culture, and this might be the same with other ethnicities, you don't get a divorce. Like you struggle through that marriage, even if you're being abused, whatever it is, you do not get a divorce. Like it's frowned upon. And I was the first person in my family to get a divorce, like generations of relationships. And my grandparents, I love and they were beautiful, always nice to us. But my granddad used to hit my grandma when he was drunk. And in Fiji, that was like, shit happens. That's a marriage. That's a relationship. And so for me to get a divorce broke that pattern of trauma from progressing any further than me. And my parents did the same in the sense of like, my dad's Muslim, my mom's Hindu. It's a big no-no for Muslims and Hindus to marry.
That's true. Yeah.
But they got married. And so they broke their trauma. So I think with generational trauma, somebody has to nip it,
Mm.
and then it doesn't progress any further.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
There has to be a rebel in the group.
Yeah,
to break
I love
that.
to think that I'm that rebel,
Mm.
but I've never been a rebel. Like I've always been such a goody two shoes and not wanting to like upset my parents or get in trouble. But now I have this like urge to be a rebel. I'm like, I want to skinny dip and get arrested.
There's a first for everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
Nice.
So yeah, I find it interesting, like the
Mm.
things that get passed down
Mm.
and who decides to break it.
Yeah. Was that a struggle for you to decide to be that person to break that trouble?
Oh, for sure. And I knew that it was nothing to do with me because I was more concerned about what other people were going to say.
Mm.
Like we'd just gotten married and everybody came to our wedding in Fiji. You know, like invested a lot of money to travel there.
Yeah.
And none of it had to do with my happiness.
Mm.
And my parents have always been amazing. So they were a great support in saying like, you do it. Like if you want to end it, you end it.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it was hard to be the first person to do it.
Mm.
Mm.
But it required a lot of therapy to get through it.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it feels amazing now.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
Because I wouldn't not have had the expansion that I've had in 3 years had I stayed in that relationship. And sometimes it's hard to see it in that moment. And especially in that moment, like I was going through a divorce, abusive relationship, got cheated on, didn't have a job, didn't have money. Like, you know that pocket where everything that could go wrong goes wrong? But I think there's so much to learn from that moment if you choose to survive it.
Yeah.
Like if you choose to progress from it.
Yeah. Hindsight's 2020. Like you won't really
Yeah.
see until it's like, oh shit, like everything brought me to this point. If those things didn't happen, would I really be here? Like all the struggles and all the difficulties that you had to face. But because you never gave up, you kept on getting up, you kept on pushing on, you reach that point, it's like that realization, like, wow, you know, because of all those things, I just happen to be here right now, you know. And you'll never know once you get there. Sometimes it takes years.
Yeah.
It takes time to finally have that realization.
Because dark tunnels are hard to get out of, right? My sister and I call it, and I think it's from a comedian, but we call it the I'm going to die moments. Like when you're like, I'm going to die. And then you get out of it and you're like, I wasn't going to die.
Yeah.
Like it was fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But in that moment, it's like you get tunnel vision. Like you don't see anything good because everything bad is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for you to share your stories on that, you've come to a level of comfort in your struggle to be able to share this, because it's obviously not easy to do maybe in the past, right? And I guess thank you for sharing your stories with us as well. So
Thank you.
I really
It's still not
appreciate you
easy to
doing
do because it almost gets to the point of like, I never want to make anybody sound bad
that.
or to make my ex sound bad. Like, and it's just, it's a hard point of sharing
Yeah.
where I have to be conscious of the things that I say that doesn't blame somebody else or make someone else sound like a bad person. So I don't think people are bad people unless let's take that back. I think there's some bad people. But I think like, generally speaking, most of humanity, people aren't bad. They do terrible things, right? Like I'm talking about whether you've hurt somebody, I'm not talking about in a global world scheme of things. Yeah. Because if we're talking about global world leaders, then I think they're definitely terrible people in the world. But just in terms of like day-to-day life, people make mistakes all the time. And we all have, right? Like wishing that we could take things back.
Yeah. And most people do mean well.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't realize what you're doing
Yes.
until you come out of that state and you've had time to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many times that I've said things that I'm like, I wish I had not said that.
Yeah.
Because I think once it's left your mouth, like there's no rewind.
I think you can learn a lot from the regrettable moments. Like if you didn't take action, you wouldn't know how to learn from it, right? You'd be walking on eggshells the whole time. Whereas if you do those mistakes, you can be like, okay, I know not to say that anymore. I know not to do that. Maybe I can do it a different way, right? So
that comes with a sense of awareness as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Because some people are sometimes oblivious to what they're saying and like, oh, that was kind of offensive. But it's not, yeah, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm
Mm.
amazed that some people don't have that. Like that moment of like, oh shit, I probably shouldn't have said that. That always astounds me.
They're just still smiling.
Yeah, I'm like, that was me.
Everyone's built different, right? That's
Yeah.
what makes us who we are. Human
Mm.
beings so unique. You know?
So how do you develop that awareness? Then?
Mm. I guess it's someone actually telling, like, what do you call it?
Sometimes it is
Talking to
pointing
you
it
and-
out. Yeah.
pointing it out, and just having that, you know, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah,
That's
because if you're
nice.
oblivious to it, then it's never going to change. Like you don't have, yeah, yeah.
I think it's a big part of growth too,
Mm.
like the things that you go through. So I remember I used to have this opinion of like people in abusive relationships. And I was like, I don't understand why you don't just leave. Like, why are you still with that person that's constantly abusing you? Until it happened to me. And I was like, this is how you do it. Like, you just stay in it because you just
Yeah.
keep ignoring it. But I would not have had that judgmental perspective change had that not happened to me.
Mm.
And so I think a big part of awareness is just you growing.
Mm. Yes, yes. Mm.
It's
Got
safety
deep
and
real quick.
safety and comfortability into existing situations
Yeah.
as well, and to break away, it's all right losing that, and it's that sunk cost as well, because you've already invested so much time and life and love into that previous relationship potentially as well.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, and another thing is that you're always thinking about the other person, or you're never selfish for yourself. Like, how's this gonna affect my happiness? Oh, like you're always just thinking about, oh, I want other people to be happy, or what are they gonna say about me if I do this? Blah blah blah. You're never thinking about just your own happiness. Sometimes it's just, yeah, being selfless is important. Like, you have to take care of yourself.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to do that, to care about their own happiness?
Mm.
I think
It's
especially
interesting.
because we're now in this doing culture, right?
Yes, yeah.
And it comes down to like, I mean, I go to Insta a lot, but in terms of like posting what you're doing. And I do that. Like, I'm totally guilty of it. And this is why I use it as an example. But I try to filter out what I'm sharing and the reason for the things that I'm sharing. And there's been many times where I've like deleted things because I'm like, that's just me boasting. That's not going to benefit anybody.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't know where I was going with that. My brain just went,
It's like going down. It was like, this
Chopper. So what is your relationship to social media? I know you're very active on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I figured out what I'm on there for, and I figured out what I'm using it for.
Yeah.
And sometimes I deviate because I get pulled away onto the cool stuff when somebody sends me free clothes and I'm like, oh, I'm going to post. And I was like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Why am I doing it? And the only reason I'm doing it is because everybody else is doing it and it's cool. And I want to be part of the cool gang. And so now I think I'm more conscious about it, about the things that I say yes and no to.
Mm.
But now I use it as a platform for a few different things. So first of all, to talk more about neuroscience. And to put that information out there
True.
in a way that's accessible for people. So like with We Run West, I do once a week a neuroscience post. And I usually read a few different papers and I summarize the research article into a little tiny paragraph, which is a pain and it's so hard. But I love it. So for me, it's a way to share my knowledge, because what's the point of having a knowledge that you're not going to share with people? Like, it just defeats the purpose. And then all my blood, sweat, and tears of 10 years just goes to waste. And so I see it as like sharing of information. But I'm also a big supporter of like Aussie companies and Aussie labels and small businesses. And so I feel like a lot of the things that I post, even though they're like, oh, she's eating another croissant the third time today. Like, it's not about the croissant. It's about the place that I got it from.
True.
And the fact that I think those people are amazing, you know? And I promote a lot of my friends' business. It's called Inro, which is a sustainable clothing brand. So it's recycled rental clothing. So it's secondhand clothing. You get a box of 6 clothes and you wear it for a month. And I love that idea. In a consumer-driven world,
Wow.
for somebody to think outside of the box, literally, and to provide this, like, so that's my thing. Is like, I love promoting these people that are doing cool things for the world and highlighting them and helping them get their message out there, rather than I'm going to share this outfit because it's pretty.
And they gave it to you for free.
Yeah.
It's the community, not the product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's what my Instagram is about now, is supporting other people and supporting my knowledge.
So I'd imagine neuroscience is like a massive spectrum to talk about. Like, what is your focus, especially in your studies or whatever you're doing with it?
How much time do we have?
I was gonna check.
Okay.
It's almost 5 to 1.
Okay.
I started in developmental neuroscience. So my PhD was on preterm birth, so babies that are born early, and babies in particular that get apnea, so the cessation of breathing, they stop breathing, and it happens commonly in preterm babies. So when that happens, they get injected with caffeine, which a lot of people find fascinating.
Yeah.
That's how I love coffee so much. I know a lot about caffeine. So my PhD was essentially on caffeine in the brain. And so the babies get injected with caffeine, and it stops the airways from closing. So saves their life. But babies that are also born preterm, they can't breathe as well, so they go on ventilation. So caffeine kind of helps them come off the ventilation a lot quicker, because ventilation induces lung damage as well.
Oh, wow.
So there's a whole bunch of different things. So my PhD was looking at how caffeine affects the brain and immature preterm brains. And then correlating that to studies that are being done in humans, where these kids are now 12 years of age and they're getting MRIs done to see how the caffeine's changed them or if it hasn't. But when I was doing that, I started learning more about caffeine and Parkinson's disease and how it's been implicated in Parkinson's, like helping people either delay the onset or affect their symptoms. And so then I wanted to go switch the perspective from like developing brain to aging brain. And there was a person in particular in Seattle that I wanted to work with, who's a really cool neuropathologist. It's a bad idea working with him. He's Chinese and he never slept. He just worked.
Oh God.
And yeah, we'd have meetings on Saturdays, like Saturdays at 2 o'clock.
Neuropathologist.
Yeah, so he's the person that he basically walks in as a consultant, super smart, looks at a brain like under a microscope or whatever, or samples of it, and basically says this person has Parkinson's, had Parkinson's, has Alzheimer's. Like, he kind of does that kind of thing. And so his area of research was Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So that's what I started working on then, was finding better ways to diagnose it early, because right now people get diagnosed really late, and by then their symptoms have already started and it just gets worse. And one of the ways to diagnose Alzheimer's is via spinal tap, and not everybody wants to get a spinal needle stuck into your spine every couple of weeks. So I was trying to find a way to diagnose it using blood. So that was kind of like my postdoc side of things. And then I got sick of asking the government for money, and I said, screw you, and I left. Is the short story version of it. But I also don't think I would have survived in that world, in the research world, to be honest. Like, I just didn't have the drive to fight for funding, to come up with brand new research ideas, have it be knocked down. And I think it takes a certain type of person who is incredibly talented to survive in that environment. And I have friends who are still there, and they're amazing scientists, but I just couldn't. It's not something that I could be. Yeah. So now I've kind of shifted. Now I work more in drug development, medical device development. And I don't work on as much neuro studies as I used to. Mostly because COVID has taken over everything. But yeah, so I still have my feet in like the clinical science side of things, but not my own research. Yeah.
Have you had much experience with psychedelics?
No, but I have a fascination with psychedelics at the moment. But I feel like that's another hour conversation. But
I know.
I think longer than an hour.
My bad.
but yeah, I have a big interest in psychedelics, just in terms of like where it's going at the moment, in terms of like, working with depression
Therapy
and things like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I won't
because
go into personal experience, but yeah.
yeah, well, I can explain first-hand experiences when you're talking about when you're in that feeling and you feel trapped, right? I've had those moments on psychedelics and it feels like you're gonna die. It's set and setting, so where you're at and who you're with is really important when you're consuming these substances. And it works really well when you're out in nature and in the open, because you feel the expansiveness of the environment around you. And so I've been volunteering for an organization called Harm Reduction Victoria and Dancewise for a couple of years now. And it's about taking care of patrons and punters at music festivals so that they don't cause harm to themselves and others as well. And at festivals, no matter how prohibitive and illegal it is, people will find a way to do it, right? So I guess it's recognizing and understanding, all right, things are going to happen, so we will address the need of the market and take care of them in times of struggle or when potential harm arises. But my experiences are when you've taken these substances and it feels like you're going to die, right? Your mind is like closing in on you. You spiral out of control in terms of some thoughts or maybe some problems that you're having, and you feel like it's all your fault. You are the center of this universe, and it's the lights are turning off and it's like, all right, game over, bye-bye, you're out. And that's how it feels. But then you work through it and then you're like, you struggle, maybe you surrender to this supposed death, right? And then you realize, hang on, that wasn't as bad as what I thought it was. Hang on, oh look, I made a mistake, but I can do this instead next time. And then the lights turn on, and then you start opening it up to the world again, and you just feel this openness. And that's one of the main reasons what's drawn me to yoga itself. When you're lying in Shavasana at the end of a practice, after a super sweaty practice where you've done all these movements and you've really pushed your body to certain limits potentially, and then you're just lying there in absolute bliss. That's the correlation I draw from psychedelics to yoga. And I don't do that much any substances like that anymore, because I've got this practice where I can draw on naturally, where I can just breathe and tap into what's already there.
And that's the concept of like practicing asana too, right? Like you end in Shavasana, which is corpse pose. And the intention is that you're like, that's the death. And then you're reborn at the end of the practice, which I think is pretty cool.
That's why I
Just
got
all like a
emotional.
mind blown moment.
Just trying to process everything.
Because I got reborn.
I got reborn.
Oh,
I was reborn today.
I'm a new man. Right, that's amazing, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna say if I had those experiences myself, but like through other things. But
From what I've heard.
from what I've heard through papers
This
and
book that I
yeah,
read.
this book that I read and podcasts, like I see that like in those times when people use those substances, they feel like they're the center of the universe, right? And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to get out of it, right? It's how. I don't know where I was going with this. I've lost my train of thought.
So I don't know if you've heard of this term. I only learnt it recently from a friend who's a counselor, but he works a lot in the mental health field and he's looking at psychedelics. So he did a diploma. I don't want to get it wrong. But he looked into psychedelics and they do this thing of having a sitter
Yeah.
And I love that way of doing it.
Mm.
Like if you want to experiment, to have somebody that's going to be there for you. And it makes things so much more accessible.
Yeah.
Like
Mm,
in
mm.
terms of people aren't going to do something ridiculous.
Yeah.
That you have somebody looking after you.
That-
But I love
grounds
that
you.
concept. Pardon?
It kind of grounds you as well, like brings you back to
Yeah.
the here and now, like because you can get so inside your head sometimes that
Yeah.
sometimes you just be like, hey, like,
And it's scary not being able to be in control of your own brain.
Mm.
Mm,
Yes. Yeah.
exactly that. So I think that's why I asked you the question, because it's a growing field in mental health at the moment, because pharmaceuticals have been pushing these pills and antidepressants. I don't know anything about that, but it's just consuming and popping it all. And potentially psychedelics are a way to reset certain things that are happening in
Well,
here.
I think there's a lot of things, right? Like and before I say this, I think there's a place for antidepressants.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that they're there for a reason, and I think people do need to take them.
Mm-hmm.
In saying that, I remember like when I was going through my terrible year, if I had seen a psychologist at that point, I would have been prescribed antidepressants.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is what people should do. I only did this because of how my parents are and the things that they believe in and the things that they use. And I grew up, with natural remedies and things like that, with things that my grandparents used. And when we'd get food poisoning, Mum would be like, "Oh, it's the evil eye," like that. That's how I grew up. And so at that point, instead of seeing a psychologist, I went to see a therapist that my mum was seeing when Grandma passed away. And this therapist she's a counselor and she's a kinesiologist, which is science, so it's muscle testing. But she's also on like the hippier side of things, which is like she channels and she works with energy and a realignment and past trauma, which is amazing. Like my science brain battles with this stuff. But then some of the things she'll say, I'm like, how do you know that? Like, how did you know my history without knowing anything about me? And so I think there's things that science it doesn't explain. But anyway, that's a different conversation. So I started seeing her. My mum was a master Reiki practitioner at a time. I started getting Reiki every day, and I'd be sobbing every day, like crying every day, getting Reiki every day. And within 6 months, I was out of that headspace, maybe even less than 6 months. I think it was 4 months before I got a job. And it's amazing. Like this was no drugs, no substance use, no alcohol.
Yeah.
Like I knew I needed to stay away from alcohol because that just makes everything worse.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't drink, didn't take anything. All I did was go and see this counselor, which my mum would drive to go and see because she lives in Mornington. So mum would drive me to Mornington. Dad would pack me like dinner in a little container because he knows that I get hungry. And that got me out of that space. And so I think there is more now, this shift of trying different things, of alternative things. And that's part of the reason why I did my Reiki course, is to understand that separate aspect of it, like a different side. And I remember Mum got offered this job at Peter Mac to give Reiki to cancer patients.
Whoa.
So I think there's a shift now in different modalities and different ways of treating.
Tell us
But it's
about
slow.
Reiki. What is?
I don't want to butcher it. So
it's a hard one, hey.
it is a hard one. It's kind of something that, I don't know, Mum describes it really well, but it's essentially a Japanese guy that kind of discovered that you can move energy through people and you can work with other people's energy. So it's not really, you're not healing anybody, you're working with their energy to shift things and shift the things that they're holding on to. So the training is like a 4-part training course. And essentially you get taught to work with the chakra system and work with energy and balancing out. But then there's symbols as well that you can use, and each of the symbols are Japanese characters, and they stand for different things. Like whether you think somebody is fearful of something, you'd use that symbol, that kind of stuff. My science brain I still fight it, like argue with it, but then there's just random things that happen that I can't describe any other way. So like this morning, so now I do Reiki in the room before I start my classes.
Oh.
And this morning after the flow class, it was the longest line at the toilets. Like people were waiting to go to the bathroom. And I was like, what is going on? And then my mom was in the class in the morning and she was standing in the corner and she was like, and it's because she knows that I did Reiki. And the thing is that people believe that with Reiki, it's like a clearing. So you want to go to the toilet, like you want to pee because it's like this movement through the body, like clearing of the body. And she knows that I did Reiki in the room before the class. And so all these people, I'm like, how do you explain that? Like, there's never been a line in my classes. And all of a sudden I'm doing Reiki. And there's like, so it's just, but it's fun to play around with. Like, I think it's fun to explore what your body is capable of doing and what your mind is capable of doing. That's amazing. You don't need a scientist to tell you that that's impossible because no one knows the power of your brain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I find it fascinating.
I find it funny that your mum was.
It's like, good job. I'm like, lady, I just do it for fun. Like, does this stuff work? Let me check.
So you're still skeptical about it? Do you ever think you'll believe it?
I came to the realization that I don't have to believe it. And I think that science and like Eastern and Western medicine can exist together, that I don't have to pick one or the other. And I think I come from that belief because Reiki has taken me out of a lot of dark places. And so it'll always have this special place for me, regardless of whether some scientist said it works or it doesn't. A lot of scientists laugh about it, like, and make fun of it. But I also know that my grandma's used so many things that has saved a lot of people in our families. And I think there'll always be a space for Western medicine. And I think it's needed. But I think that we really need to shift into a world where things coexist.
Yes. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
It's not just black and white.
Yeah, exactly. And one pill doesn't save everybody, right?
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with these modalities. Like you wouldn't prescribe an antidepressant, the same antidepressant to everybody because everyone reacts differently. So why would you do the same for therapies? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, it's a very, very passionate topic.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Fantastic.
But how do you change that with other people? Because obviously not everyone has the same mindset as you. So it's like, how can you influence and inspire that?
It's funny, like my sister and I are having this conversation as well. So she's in her final year of physiotherapy. And she was saying that one of her lecturers was making fun of Reiki. Like, oh, we're not going to just place our palms on people and heal them. You need to move them. And so I think that needs to go away. Like how people talk about it and how people bring down other people. And I think there's a fine line between not believing in something but being respectful of it. And I think if somebody tells you that Reiki saved them, who cares how it worked?
That's for sure.
And there's there's so much research now on belief effect, right? Of the things that you believe, you're able to do it. And with placebo, it's the same thing. It's just harnessing the power of your brain. And so that's all I see Reiki as, is just you're tapping into this other potential that nothing else is allowing you to access. And it's amazing, like when we did the training, so we all did healing on the same person. And we wrote down notes of what came up for us, the things that we resonated with. And we started going around in a circle and sharing, and we had the same stuff, like wrote down the same stuff. So what explanation is there of,
wow,
like
That's
science can't
crazy.
explain that.
That's cool.
And you can't make that up. And so I still battle with it, but I've also come to realize that, you know what, it's fine to accept it. And there was a part of me that was always like, I never wanted to tell people that I got Reiki from my mom, or that mom does Reiki, or that I did my level 2 Reiki course, you know, like as a scientist, it's like I would lose integrity. But now I'm like, I just don't give a shit if you believe in it or not.
Some things aren't meant to be known. But I
Yeah.
guess it's just
And I kind of like
perfectly
that.
the mystery of it all, and then the beauty of the mystery as well.
And there's a power in it, I think.
So my last question for you is,
This sounds scary.
Final
Final question.
you know so much about the brain, given your study of it, and if you were to share a couple of tidbits of information or tips or uses of the brain for just anybody out on the street, what would you share with them from just such a deep neuroscience background?
God, there's so many things. I think my big one for always is to never be stagnant with things. So like changing things up, right? Like whether that's you're going to using a different road to get to work, brushing your teeth with your left hand for a change, like just anything different that switches things up. So change is good for the brain. There's a place for routine to build habit, because you need to continuously do something to build a habit.
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing is noticing the things that you do mindlessly and the things that you do mindfully. So if you come to a yoga studio and you're picking the same spot every single time, what purpose is that serving? And so challenging your brain in a sense of like doing new things, learning new things, changing things up. Like, and I think that's probably like there's so many different things, right? Like there's diet that plays a role in it. But I think adapting to different things and doing different things is a big one. And that's something that I do, like constantly shifting out of your comfort zone. But in saying that, you have to be stable to shift out of your comfort zone.
That's true.
If you're unstable, you're going to be a mess when you shift out of that comfort zone. So using grounding tools like meditation, like breathing or breathing techniques, and then shifting out of the space. Because it's just, if you're stagnant in somewhere, your brain's going to become stagnant.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah.
My final word of wisdom.
Final words of wisdom.
A lot of wisdom has been
A
shared.
lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
My brain's kind of
Definitely.
fried, honestly. The past like 20 minutes, I was just like, I kind of want to eat something.
Anybody got psilocybin?
Nah, this was awesome. Though. Like, I love the conversations we've been having. Like, we went from joking about Anzara being a god to
Please edit that.
that's staying in, and really humanizing her with all the struggles and the deep stuff and she's been very vulnerable, and we thank you for that.
Yes.
It's never easy, like as Lim says, it's never easy to be vulnerable. So really appreciate that so much. Just to wrap things up, 3 questions we always end with. 3 questions. So what are you grateful for? What have you realized? And what is a question you want to ask yourself for to the people listening?
I'll let somebody else start. Liam.
I've already answered
He's
this
already
question.
answered it, right?
Oh, what?
Yeah, so
On a
So it's
previous-
all me.
Yeah.
Okay. What am I grateful for? People, just in general, like being surrounded by people. What was the second one?
What have you realized?
I think a big one for me this year is that being kind doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. There's a difference.
Yeah.
And then the final question.
What's the question you want to ask yourself or the people listening?
I think the question that I want to ask myself, and something that I have been asking myself this year, is what am I fearful of that's stopping me from expanding further?
Love it. That's awesome. That's beautiful. Well, thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate you taking the time, and appreciate you, Lim and Anzara, for taking the time on a Saturday to be with us and allow us to be in this space, especially Melissa from Assembly Yoga.
Yes.
And yeah, well, just a shout out to them. Make sure if you're in Footscray, is there a website that they can go to check out times and when they can come in to, for sessions?
There is a website.
I think it's
Just
Assembly
Yoga.
Studios.
Is it Assembly Studios? Yeah.
We'll put the
.com.au.
link. We'll put a
We'll
graphic.
We'll put the link down below. We'll tag it in the description.
Yeah.
But we really appreciate the time you guys are taking. And as we always say, always take care, always stay safe, and always choose to get up. Peace!
Okay.